One of the primary responsibilities of any nonprofit board member is to maintain the financial integrity of the organization they serve. Board members are the trustees of an organization's assets, and they must exercise due diligence and oversight to ensure that the nonprofit is well managed and that its financial status remains sound. It's a fiduciary responsibility, and you need to understand what that means if you're on the board of a nonprofit. So what is a fiduciary? Well, Webster's defines it this way. A fiduciary is a trustee and is legally accountable to serve the other party's interests before their own. I like the way our friends over at BoardSource say it. Fiduciary duty requires board members to stay objective, unselfish, responsible, honest, trustworthy, and efficient. Board members, as the stewards of the public trust, must always act for the good of the organization rather than for the benefit of themselves. They need to exercise reasonable care in all decision-making without placing the organization under unnecessary risk. Now that's thorough enough that we could almost stop the video here.
Cut.
But we won't.
Action.
Being a fiduciary obviously involves the financial aspects of a nonprofit. Each board member has a responsibility to ensure that, to the best of their ability, all funds are handled and accounted for in a transparent and compliant manner. Now, that includes a number of financial responsibilities, which we're going to look at next. One financial responsibility is budgeting. Now, the board should determine the organization's budget each year. With larger nonprofits, it's not uncommon to see a specific committee compile the annual budget, often with the participation of staff members who directly handle the funds. Whether or not the budget is put together by others and presented to the board for approval, or the board members develop the budget directly themselves, the board should sign off on the annual expenditure picture for the upcoming year. Too many times we see nonprofits with no written budget and no oversight by the board. Well, that amounts to a dereliction of duty, and it does nothing to relieve the board members from financial responsibility. Ignorance is a choice, but it's not an excuse. As a board member, you have to know what's going on in these areas. The next area of financial responsibility is payroll and compensation. One of the most important responsibilities of a board is establishing compensation guidelines. Now, this can get a little confusing as to where the customary lines are drawn. We've seen plenty of situations where the board does all the staff hiring. Well, that might work in a smaller charity, but once you start having significant numbers of staff members, that really becomes impractical. What's important is for the board to set parameters for each staff position, not necessarily each staff person. Again, the legwork might be done by a committee for later board approval. Now, this is a big deal because the IRS limits nonprofit salaries to what it calls reasonable compensation. Now, that's a fairly vague standard, but salaries should be tied directly to job descriptions. They should be comparable to similar positions in similar organizations, and they should be within the financial means of the nonprofit. This is especially important for executive compensation. Next up is accounting and reporting. Nonprofits are required by law to account for income and expenditures with compliant bookkeeping practices and file IRS Form 990 each year. There's possible state-level reporting as well. Your organization must be able to produce accurate, standardized financial reports, such as an income statement and a balance sheet. If it cannot, then it is likely that your accounting practices are not quite up to snuff. Again, the board must ensure proper accounting and reporting is happening at all times. It's great to hire a professional to do the work, and we frankly usually recommend that. Foundation Group provides bookkeeping services to many nonprofits on a monthly basis. The point is less about who does it and more about the fact that it must be done, and done right. What many board members don't know, however, is that the IRS and most states require nonprofits to satisfy what's known as the prudent man rule in investing. Now, the prudent man rule basically means that investments by a 501c3 should not be excessively risky, and there's got to be a real balance between risk and return. We often get questions as to whether or not a nonprofit can invest in the stock market. Well, yes, they can. There's no prohibition on that. But if the average charity is contemplating investing in such things, and they are deciding between investing in an index fund or cryptocurrency, well, I hope you can guess which is the right answer to that one. Handling of funds. Now, this one often gets overlooked until it bites someone. How money is handled within an organization is one of the most important aspects of fiduciary responsibility. Now, I'm talking about the literal handling and the virtual handling. Literal handling involves who is touching the money. Virtual means who's accounting for it. Whether it's cash from sales or checks that come in from donors, it's crucial to have multiple accountability. Now, that means at least 2 independent people need to be involved in money handling and accounting, sometimes more. Having only one person who is responsible for receiving, spending, and accounting for the funds is a recipe for disaster. Here's a little story for you. Back in the late 90s, in the early days of our company, I was hired by a local historic mansion museum to come in and reconcile their books each month and compile financial reports. Well, before I was brought in, all financial activity had been the responsibility of the nonprofit's administrative assistant. Unfortunately, it didn't take me long to discover significant problems. As I dug into the records, the problems just got worse. Eventually, I was able to prove that the administrative assistant had been skimming cash from the gift shop for a long time, to the tune of over $60,000. But because no one else handled the money, she was never caught. And to make matters worse, the board chose not to prosecute her because they didn't want their major donors to realize how badly they had messed up by not requiring oversight and separation of duties. Having multiple people handling funds also protects your staff and volunteers. When only one person is involved and an irregularity is discovered, they're almost always guilty until proven innocent. Now, that's not fair to put someone in that position. Let's close out our topic by talking about the penalties associated with failing at your fiduciary duty. It really depends on the situation and the expected level of responsibility on any one board member, but there are multiple ways that this can go down. One penalty is the loss of credibility and trust should your failure become known. Now, this may simply reflect badly on you, or it could tarnish your entire organization, maybe even permanently. I take you back to my former client who covered up grand larceny to save face. Another lesser-known penalty is one the IRS can levy directly against board members called intermediate sanctions. Now, I really don't have time to go into detail on this in this video, but this is when the IRS penalizes board members for allowing individuals to receive private benefit by virtue of their insider role in the organization. Now, usually this happens when there's grossly excess compensation involved. We'll do another video soon on intermediate sanctions penalties. The last penalty I'll mention is just the legal risk of failing in fiduciary duty. Look, people get sued all the time. If a board flagrantly allows financial mismanagement, it's possible that a donor or maybe a member sues the board. And if you think that never really happens, you'd be wrong about that. You can virtually eliminate that risk, however, by having proper measures in place. Fiduciary responsibility is not something to be feared, but rather something to be understood. I've met a lot of people who would make great board members, but they won't do it for fear of this responsibility. That's just not necessary. The standards and guidelines are there. Understanding what's expected and putting forth your best good faith effort to make sure things are handled properly is simply your job as a board member. So go and serve. Well, that's it for this video. If you liked it, please be kind enough to hit the like button. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget the little bell icon to be notified of new content when we post it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.